and I could see myself lying on the operating table. I knew it was me. I recognized myself, but I was no longer in my body. And he felt it, not necessarily, I guess, above it, but like out of it, which kind of was above it. And then he said he looked up and he saw this tall 9-foot being in front of him.
Welcome to Eleusis TV, where ancient wisdom meets modern awakening.
Here's a special clip for my friend Will, who studied in Australia, mate. Here you go, clap up.
Nice one, mate.
Done. Lovely. Cool. Yeah, I'll never forget late September. I think it was like middle to late September. It was end of term in 1989. I was in grade 11, or as we used to call it, standard 9. Like I said, I was 17 years old. I was at a friend's house, and we were busy playing snooker. Now, we were normally on a pool table, so snooker table is like almost twice the size, and we sucked. So we just played all night, and it was good fun. And I completely forgot about the time. And before I knew it was like 10:30, and I was like, oh man, I was supposed to be home at 9:30. Let me get home. So I got on my bike, very cool. I already sort of worked out my speech of why I was late. And I got to the front door, very cool teenager with my floppy blonde hair, cruising through the front door. My brother just grabbed me by the chest. He's like, where were you? We were looking for you. Like, why didn't you phone? Why are you so late? And I was like, dude, what's wrong with you, man? He was only like 2 years older than me. I was like, would you become the come home late police, or what's the story? And next thing I could see my mom, and my mom just had this like shocked look on her face, and she's like, where were you? Like really upset. And I was like, we were just playing pool, and it ran late and whatever. And then she dropped the bomb. She's like, Dad's had a heart attack. He's in ICU, he's in hospital. Like the whole world just turned into slow-mo. I remember just dropping my head onto the sideboard in the lounge and just like stood there, like I didn't know what to say. Like I didn't know how to react even. I was like, that doesn't happen when you're 17. Your dad's supposed to, like, he's going to live forever, right? It's the first time you kind of come into this weird, grandparents passed away, but not dad, So it was very, shock is the only way. I wasn't like sad, just shocked, like stopped in my tracks. Life just stopped me right in my tracks. And I was just, the best way I can describe it is shock. So in other words, like your whole system goes, I don't know how to deal with this. So that's where I was at. And then they told me what had happened. He was on the golf course and apparently had a backache, and it was apparently an angina thing. Now, usually when you have heart issues, the angina pain shoots down your arm, and that's and my dad's a doctor. He was a medical doctor, and so he would have known about it, but he said he always had chronic back pain. Little did he know that was actually the beginnings of heart trouble, and had no idea. And then, of course, ends up in a heart attack. He ends up in ICU in the hospital, hanging by a thread. My mom instinctively didn't really want to tell us how bad it was. They were like literally saying to her, you need to prepare because this isn't good at all. Like he's not winning. And it was so bad that the town where we lived, East London, even though there were several hospitals that were very capable hospitals, that none had a cardiology ward that could actually deal with this kind of situation, which when they phoned their colleagues in Bloemfontein at the, I think it was the National Hospital in Bloemfontein, they said, he probably needs a bypass operation because what you're describing is not great, I remember seeing my dad the next day, and a few words were passed between us. He just said his girlfriend was there earlier in the day, his buddy always would play with. And he was a dentist, this friend of his, and this guy was in tears, And I remember thinking at the time, why was he in tears? I mean, you're just in hospital, aren't you going to get better? And little did I know that only years later I would find out why he was in tears. As a medical professional, he knew he was probably saying goodbye, and I had no idea. Anyway, what happened was then is that they needed to stabilize him because they had to get into Bloemfontein. But the problem was they couldn't fly commercially because, as the cardiologist explained to us, first of all, it was illegal and no airline would take that kind of risk. So, because he was in such a bad state. So they had to arrange for a private plane. But the problem was small planes aren't pressurized, which they then said wasn't great for the heart. And then one of the biggest issues he had was he had a lot of, he had moisture on his lungs. And they didn't quite know how to remove it. It's called an edema, I think. It's like you have it edema, I think. And that's like the kind of moisture you get on your brain when you're climbing Everest, like what causes altitude sickness. And it literally, that extra moisture just messes with your whole system. And in the same way with his lungs, he, because it creates difficulty to breathe, things start shutting down, and he had all this moisture, and they were trying to figure out how to deal with it. So anyway, being in ICU, you get checked every half hour. And he was in ICU, I think, for like almost 2 weeks at that point. And they were literally hanging by a thread, trying to get a plane to Bloemfontein and all this sort of thing. In the meantime, what happens one night, he has literally had like holes in his chest where they put pipes and blood and draining things and whatever, and feeding him and stuff like that. And this one pipe falls out, and blood starts, like his own blood starts draining. And like no one sees it. And I like checked on him and nobody sees it. And the next thing, a nurse notices this massive puddle of blood on the floor after, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, I can't remember. Because obviously it's not flying out of his chest, it's just dripping. And she realizes, oh my word, this is a major issue. They fix it up and everything. And then when the doctor examines him, he realizes we've just dealt with the moisture issue. This blood draining out ended up being like the solution that they were looking for. And now he was stabilized enough. So for us, that was like, because my mom and my dad, they're both Christians, and they were praying all the time. I mean, the entire church was praying for him. He was, like I said, he was a doctor, and he was a very beloved doctor. He was like like they used to call him the beloved, because people just loved going to him. He had the most incredible bedside manner. I always used to say he didn't just fix your body physically, he would fix your heart at the same time, because often being sick is traumatic, so it's not just your body that's broken, but sometimes your heart even gets broken. And he was amazing at loving people that way. So people were just devastated that he was in this state, and then they managed to stabilize him. And my aunt, who's like quite an organizer, she managed to find some small plane. Anyway, my dad flew eventually, I think after 2 weeks in ICU, they flew him up to Bloemfontein. He landed. When he got there, the cardiologist, which I know from his report that I read, said he was, actually in quite good spirits for someone who's been through what he's been through. But they said to him, look, this is an emergency. We need to get you into theater so we can do an angiogram, which is they basically put a catheter up your veins from your leg upwards into your heart. And it's a little pipe that they can pump ink through. And so the ink comes up on a screen and it shows you where the blockages are. And so I remember my dad telling me he was lying on this table with the angiogram, and he was looking up at the screen, and he said to them, okay, boys, pump, because he's a doctor, he knows what he's looking for, right? And they said, Doc, we've already pumped twice, there's nothing left. My dad's like, what? Doc, your one artery is completely blocked, and the other two is less than 30% functioning. We don't even know how you're alive right now. And it was slightly after that they said to him, look, they wheeled him back to the theater. And I remember from the cardiologist report, he had another heart attack. So you can imagine he's had several heart attacks now. The heart muscle, when it goes through a heart attack, through that kind of shock, it destroys it, right? So they realized that there needs to be an operation now, an emergency op, because he was, just suffered another heart attack. So the cardiologist came to my dad and he said to him, look, my consultation is this: we have to have a heart op right now. And as they wheeled him back to the theater, he had another heart attack. And it became like, it was already super serious. Now it became off the chart serious, like emergency op. And cardiologist informed him, like, I hadn't done this kind of operation in at least 3 years. This is it's a chop you open, get in there as quick as we can, see if we can make it kind of operation. And then my mom was called in and said, look, there's a consent form that both of you need to sign. And the consent form clearly showed that he had less than 5% chance of survival. The message was, you're going to die if we don't do anything. Like now. If we do the operation, you're probably going to die. But life was 95% out of the question. So it was one of those, like, literally, this is your last chance saloon. This is the last gate before you get to the pearly gate kind of thing, And they signed it without hesitation. Both of them signed it. And my mom said at that point, they just started praying. They started getting the operating theater ready. I think it was just late on the Tuesday night, the 10th of October, 1989, 11 o'clock, round about there or so. And then what happened was, just as they were wheeling him to the operating theater, they were stopped. And they said another patient had come in who had a heart attack on a tennis court. I think it was a pastor or something that had a heart attack and had just been driven into Bloemfontein. And the rule of thumb is youngest goes first. And this guy was apparently like 35 or 38. I can't remember exactly his age, but he was in his 30s. And they said to my dad, "We're so sorry, yours is way more serious, but a rule of thumb, youngest goes first." So he then got the theatre. But fortunately, what happened was they just could put a stent in his vein, and they cleared the blockage, and everything was cool. So they didn't have to do a bypass op, which was like a total blessing for my dad, because now the theatre wasn't used, so they could just wheel my dad in. So they wheel him in, and by like 1 o'clock, they were like, "Where's the blood from the blood bank? Because we need blood for the op, right?" And the blood hadn't come, and everyone's freaking out. So they phone the blood bank. They're like, "What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, you cancelled it. Didn't you cancel it?" They're like, "No, that was for the young pastor that we cancelled it. We still need it for Dr. Rautenbach to..." And there was a complete mix-up at the blood bank in terms of who needed to get what, So anyway, they then eventually got the blood there. So the operation only got started at 3 a.m. So the fact that he was still hanging on at that point was just a miracle, And now I'm going to tell you what I read from the cardiologist's report. So basically, they started the operation at 3 a.m., which means they literally saw open your chest bone, and then they open it with the calipers or whatever, and then they go in and they remove the heart. And in the meantime, another surgeon started operating on his right leg, because they have to remove veins from the leg, because those are the veins they use for the bypass operation. So it's a major operation for someone who's already just hanging on to life, right? And I remember from photographs that he had like these pipes coming out of the sides of his body, and he had an endotracheal pipe in his throat, which basically makes you feel like you want to throw up all the time. It's like someone constantly sticking their finger down your throat, because that's what breathes for you, because you're now going to be put onto a heart-lung machine. So basically, this heart-lung machine is going to do the functionality of your heart and your lungs to keep you artificially alive. So anyway, so they start the operation, and they said by 5 a.m., exactly 5 a.m., what they'd done is they'd cooled his body down to the point that he's dead, right? So they cooled it down sufficiently so they could remove the heart. And when they removed, and because they stopped the heart. And so they removed the heart out of his chest cavity. And the cardiologist says, what he remembers is the surgeon held it in his hand, and he said to him, "It's over, he's dead." And he said he looked at the heart, and it was like jello, it's like jelly. There was nothing left from all the heart attacks he had. Because remember, a heart muscle is like a solid, it's soft, but it's solid, right? Because it has to all day long, But this was like jello, like there was nothing left. And like, where do we even attach things? I mean, this thing's dead. And the cardiologist said, and he was a believer, he was a man of faith, and he said to the surgeon, "I have a gut feel we should continue. I just know in my heart that we need to continue. Plus, he's a colleague, like he's a doctor. Let's do it." It's almost like last hurrah for the colleague, Let's do it. But I concur. He's dead. He's not going to make it, or he hasn't made it, And so they decided to do the operation, and they did it. And gosh, I don't know how many hours later it was completed. And then they said the next issue they had was to try and get him off the heart-lung machine, because now it's like you basically close him up. Now with all this fragility happening here, I have to get his heart beating back again. And he said they struggled for hours, like he flatlined 13 times. Like literally flatline means you're dead. 13 times before they could get him off this heart-lung machine. And eventually his heart started beating on its own, and it was fine. And it had like this good rhythm. And then, in the meantime, my mom had been running up and down the hospital hall, praying all night. And eventually, I think just as the op started, they said to her, "Look, there's not much more you can do. Here's a sleeping tablet. You need to go home because you need sleep for whatever comes on the other side of this op. Either funeral or like rehab for who knows how long." So I think it was about 10:30 or 9:30 that morning. She gets a phone call from the hospital, and the nurse says, "We think you should come to the hospital. Your husband's awake, but it's unusual because he's smiling with the endotracheal pipe in his throat. Oh, see the smiles on the side? And he's very calm," which normally our patients, almost 99% of the time, they come out of being very distressed, very disoriented. Because you're under narcotics for like 5-6 hours plus. Devastation has just happened to your body. So basically, you've been through a car crash, basically. I mean, your chest has been sewn open or sawn open and sewn back closed again and staples in your chest and, I mean, heaven knows what else. So the trauma of just that usually leaves them in a devastating state. And she said he's trying to write. And so my mom gets there. And what had happened was they put like a clipboard or like a piece of plank or something, and they put a paper on it. Now, he couldn't see, so he was just lying there making a number. And then the nurse would like either like go, this is a B, and he would go, it's an R, you know, and that's painstakingly wrote out. And what he wrote was, pray for my right leg, and he just wrote pray for, and he made an R with a circle around it, leg, bien. He wrote in Afrikaans, pray for my right leg, and then he wrote, saw Jesus angel Wednesday morning, 5 a.m. So what intrigued my mom was that he had just what he wrote, seen an angel. But what intrigued her was that he knew the time and he knew what day it was. Because remember, he went into an operation the previous day, the 10th of October. Now it's the 11th of October. He knew 5 a.m. I mean, remember, if you go into narcotics, you don't know what time you wake up. You just wake up. And he'd been in the ICU for 2 weeks up to that point. He didn't know what month it was. And here he's writing very specifically a time and a day. And so she was very intrigued. But for 4 days, he couldn't speak because he had this intratracheal pipe in his throat and the heart-lung machine still helping and whatever else. And eventually when the pipe comes over his throat, they're like, what happened? Tell us. And so he basically said, obviously he goes into operation, the narcotics is applied, he's out like a light. He said it just blacked out. And then he said, right in the middle of this blacked outness, obviously knows nothing. He just heard this massive, like a lightning strike almost, like a violent sound, you know, like a clash of a cymbal kind of thing, or like a lightning strike. And he says, and then the next thing he saw himself and he wasn't in his body anymore. Clearly could see it. And like I said, he's a scientist. He had 2 medical degrees. He's a doctor. And he said, I could clearly see myself. I was very conscious. I knew I wasn't in some state of otherworldliness or whatever in that sense, or like someone's like having a trip or a vision or something. He says, no, I know I was there. Very clear, very conscious. And I could see myself lying on the operating table. I knew it was me. I recognized myself, but I was no longer in my body. And he felt, not necessarily, I guess, above it, but like out of it, which kind of was above it. And then he said he looked up and he saw this tall 9-foot being in front of him. And because my dad is about 5'10", so he said he guessed about 3 feet taller than himself. And he said this being looked like, you know, had a beard and sort of longish brown hair, and it looked like sort of the image of what he had known Jesus to look like in his children's Bible. So he said, Jesus, and this being said to him, no, I'm not. I'm not him. I'm an angel, and I'm from him. Jesus sent me to you to tell you that you're going to live. And having signed that consent form and being a medical doctor at the same time, he knew what those words meant. It's like, this is a miracle. I'm giving you a word of life. I'm speaking life into your being. You're going to live again. And he said for him, he's Afrikaans speaking, so he said, like in his own words, like a silly Dutchman, I just said, donkey. You know, he says, thank you. That's all he said. That's all he could get out, you know. And then he said, he doesn't know why, but he said, well, what time is it? Like, as if that's important, right? But he just said, what time is it? And the angel said, it's 5 a.m. Wednesday morning. And he said, as the angel said that, it just blacked out like an olden day, like his way he described it. He said, like an olden day movie, like curtains just closed, boof, and he was gone. And all he can remember is waking up again and then feeling anxious that he was going to forget. That's why he asked to write this piece of paper. So when the anesthetist heard this, she said on the operating log, they logged that it was exactly 5 a.m. when my dad had died. When they had cooled his heart down sufficiently to do the bypass op, and when that cardiologist and the surgeon stood with his heart in his hand and they made the decision to continue the op, at that point he was dead. And so for me it was just like, wow, that happened, you know. But what did it mean to us as a family, and what does it mean post the operation, right? Well, post the operation, I think it was about 3 weeks after operation, he'd still been in ICU, obviously recovering, eventually into a recovery ward and whatever. And the word had quickly spread. But here's the incredible thing. When my aunt and uncle heard about it, and they were in East London, 700 kilometers away from there, they almost dropped like off their chairs, because they said on the morning of his operation, my uncle woke up and he woke my aunt and he said, I just dreamt something. And she's like, what? And he's like, because they used to call him Roties from Rautenbach. It's short for Rautenbach's Roti. He said, Roti saw an angel. I just dreamt Roti saw an angel. And he remembers my aunt, because they're like a comedy couple, or he's passed away now, but they were like a comedy couple. And he says all he can remember is going, Brian, shut up. It's 5 a.m. in the morning. Just come with your other dreams later. Let's just sleep. And they carried on sleeping. And they remembered this so clearly. And I think to make it more clear, oftentimes, like one thing in the Bible that's a theme, when God speaks, he says, if you listen to someone bring a testimony or a report about something, unless it's established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, you can't say that's real. So long before Roman law and English law and every other kind of law, that law was in the Hebrew culture long before, saying in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And I think for me personally, if I look at it theologically and I also look at it experientially and from a law perspective, there it was, Not only did we see the physical evidence, which is a witness in and of itself, my dad's own testimony, and then my uncle dreaming this dream, these things are real, They're real. They're not, I wouldn't call them empirical evidence. I wouldn't call it empirical evidence, because empirical evidence is something you can repeat over and over again, and you have numbers for it, and you can prove it, and you can do it. This kind of thing you can't just prove in a lab. But it requires faith, right? But here's the incredible thing too. So 3 weeks after him being in the hospital and all these things have been spoken about, the cardiologist sat my mom and my dad down, because he was now out of bed and he had been able to walk on a treadmill and things like that. She sat him down, he sat them down. And I remember reading this in the report. And he said, in the report, he says, I just threw my hands up in the air. I threw my hands up in the air and I just said to them, praise God, because this is I can't medically just explain this other than saying it's a miracle. But your husband's heart is functioning at the level of like an Olympic athlete. And I cannot explain how, because I saw the blob of jelly we were trying to deal with. And now this heart's functioning. It's impossible. Hearts don't repair like that. We were hoping he would live another 21 seconds, another maybe 5 minutes, another maybe 5 days. It's been 3 weeks now and his heart is great. And I can't explain it medically. All I can say is good luck, have a nice life, and see you again in a year for your checkup. And the irony was, every year that he went for a checkup after that, they would go, your heart's better than last year. We can't explain this. And it was weird. I remember it was like became this thing. Like every time Dad went for a checkup, it was like, because I was just waiting for the phone call to say, oh, he's had another heart attack. Oh, he's not doing great. But then it turns out, no, he's doing great. It was just a weird thing. And eventually he did pass away 21 years later. Another 21 years. He died just before his 70th birthday, and of pancreatic cancer. So it was just, it's hard to describe, like why. I don't have a why or even a how. It just is what happened. And I think oftentimes, when people talk about, does God exist? Are miracles real? I totally enjoy science. I think science is a great tool. It's not the only tool, because it can't tell us why I like U2 and why somebody else might not like U2's music. It just is what it is. Why does it appeal to me and not to somebody else? There's no scientific evidence for that. It just is what it is, But I do think that faith is a really important factor in this whole kind of conversation, because in the Bible, in Hebrews 1 and 2, or Hebrews 11, verse 1 and 2, it describes faith as a substance, like literally, my fingers are substance, right? It's the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence of things not seen. So like if I had a deed to a house and we weren't at my house, I'd be able to say, this is the evidence of the thing that you can't see that I own, right? So faith works a little bit like that. And I think in this particular case, as a 17-year-old boy, I knew when I saw my dad come back, I'll never forget it. I was standing at the airport and I saw him in the wheelchair and he was like emaciated and very thin and, it's been through ICU for like, I don't know, weeks and weeks, more than a month, this devastating operation, this miracle, all sort of thing. And I just saw him in this wheelchair. And I'll never forget the feeling. I haven't often spoken about it, but I'll never forget the feeling. I just wept because I saw someone come back from the dead. I can't explain that. I don't have scientific evidence of why I felt that way, but I knew it was true. I literally saw someone that shouldn't be there. And it affected me so deeply. I remember he got in the car and we drove. I couldn't talk. I just cried all the way home. I think 2 days later, I was still crying and I couldn't explain why. I just think this miracle literally affected me so deeply in a way that I don't have words to describe, but I knew it was true. And that's what makes the difference. It's funny, I was having a conversation with an old friend of mine. We've been friends many years, and he has a different approach to things. And one of the things that he's done is we were having a debate, and he was just saying, we contact dead people. I was like, oh, really? I said, okay, you seem very convinced, like you could prove it. And so I said, do you have empirical evidence for it? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And he gave some reason why. And I was like, no, those sort of facts or whatever, that's not empirical evidence. We can't test it in a lab. We can't confirm it. I said to him, look, maybe you don't understand what empirical evidence is. If you could get me DNA samples, physical DNA samples from these dead people that you're speaking to and prove it to me in a lab, I said, well, that's empirical evidence. And I said to him, but this thing that happened with my dad, I wouldn't use that as empirical evidence for the existence of God. Because how faith works is not, I've got this beyond doubt evidence necessarily. What it is what is the most plausible explanation that I can hang my hat on? And I would encourage people always to doubt your doubts. We know so little about what really is going on. And it's almost, we love the whole science argument because it gives us sort of the upper hand, like, oh, we can prove everything. Science is amazing. And in fact, for me, science it is a helpful tool for me to believe even more in God. If I look at the intricacy of how the world has been put together, the fact that gravity is just the right number so that we don't die, that oxygen is just the right level so that we don't die, that is science. But it's also the science of an incredible design that points to someone. I remember the one day I was flying across just from Joburg to Cape Town. I looked down through the Karoo, and there were these beautiful scars of old rivers that were there, and it looked like veins. And I looked at my hand and I went, oh, my hat, it's the same designer. This looks like that. I know art. That's what I do. I'm an actor and I'm a writer and producing that. So I know art. And I was like, yeah, that's the sign of an artist. And the one day I was walking in California and these beautiful trees were growing and they had these roots coming out. I was like, oh, my hat, that looks just like an ostrich foot. That's that design thing again. So for me, when it comes to faith, empirical evidence will only take you so far. Then there comes a point where you have to go, what is the most plausible explanation? So when you say to a 7-year-old boy, this is what happened with your dad, and the 7-year-old boy experiences his dad being alive for another 21 years, there's no science that can prove the value of that or what that meant or what weight that had. That opened up a whole beautiful cavity for me in the world of faith to realize how gracious and kind God is. And then to delve into his theology, which we obviously don't have time now, but just to go, well, what is eschatology, right? So eschatology is the way things are going to end up. What is the end of time? Where do we end up? Is there heaven? Is there hell? Is God loving and caring? Has God inserted himself into our lives in a way that can materially change things for us? All those sort of questions I started delving into simply because I went, you open up a big cavity in time. And the reason why I share this story as well is to go, hey, this story is not just for me. It's literally for someone who's watching this right now to go, hey, there's more to explore. Don't be so confident in what you're confident in and doubt your doubts. Question things like, look, you know, because I think of this miracle, and it's definitely, it didn't kill all my doubts, I can tell you that, but it certainly opened up a part of my heart that went, there's a benevolent God who cares, and really cares about people, about simple little things, you know, like moisture on your lung, and you know, that at that point in lives, I don't know why, because I know there must be kids who were 17 and lost their fathers. In fact, I know some. I don't know why he picked to keep ours. I'm grateful. And it definitely affected our lives, because I think financially we were at a very tough crossroads at that point. Because like I said, part of the reason why my dad had a heart attack was all the financial stress he had from a devastating court case he had lost in his sort of mid to early 40s, you know. So yeah, that definitely, you know, was a profound thing that happened in our life. So super grateful for it.